kids, it's Granny. I'm back. I don't know, I needed a couple of days. Sometimes, I don't know, there was like nothing going on the last couple of days. Absolutely nothing. I was totally boring. I couldn't think of anything to upload except story time, and I wanted to wait until Saturday night or Sunday to upload story time, but anyway, here it is. The story that I want to tell you tonight is the story of my brother's life, which is kind of interesting. My brother was 14 and a half when I was born. He was born in 1945, right at the end of World War II. My dad was overseas at the time. He was a very difficult birth. He was a 10-pound baby and was born breech. So you can imagine what a woman went through in 1945 delivering a breech baby in a Navy hospital. My mom said it was pretty brutal. My mother had resented my dad entering World War II, but he felt like compelled to do that because my dad's brother had been taken prisoner by the Japanese and was in the March on Bataan. I don't know a whole lot about it, but I know that he was in prisoner of war camp for a long time, got down to like 80 some odd pounds. So anyway, while he was a prisoner of war, my dad, in spite of already having a child and a wife, decided to join up because his brother was in such dire straits and he just couldn't stay home. But my mother had kind of a lot of resentment about that. I think it was on her birthday or her anniversary that he had told her that he was going to join up. And he had already done a stint in the military and then had settled down with a family and a career and joined up again in World War II when his brother was taken prisoner of war. So anyway, my brother was born. He was a very naughty little boy, from what I'm told. Like I said, he was 14 and a half when I was born, so a lot of his childhood I've only heard about from him and from my mother in later years. Apparently at 5 years old, he snuck out of the kindergarten classroom and walked all the way home. The teacher had locked him in the bathroom at school for being naughty. And rather than staying there and do his time in the bathroom, he climbed out the window and went home. And he gets home, my mother opens the door to find her 5-year-old child standing there, and before she even had a chance to ask him what was going on, the phone rang, and it was the school saying, "Is Sherwood there?" That was my brother's name, Sherwood. And my mom said, "Yeah, what's going on? He's standing on my doorstep." And the school said, "Just keep him right there. We're coming to get him." And the teacher apparently marched the whole class many blocks to where my folks lived with him and marched him back to school. Must have been quite something. That's kind of one of my mom's favorite family stories. Another time he stuck his hand up in a vending machine to try and steal something and got his hand stuck and they had to come, like, I don't know what they had to do to get him out of the machine. Another time a firecracker went off in his hand and he got his hand burned. He was just really a handful as a child. And my mom, apparently spanked him a lot. It's funny, when I came along, and my mother was raising me in the 60s, that was after Dr. Spock had come out, and I was kind of raised with kid gloves. My sister and brother both got their asses beaten regularly, so it's funny how trends in child rearing can totally change a family dynamic like that, because I didn't experience any of that. I remember my mom spanking me once when I danced around in the ivy outside our house, and she had asked me several times not to do that. And because it turned the ivy brown, but it was so fun. I think it was worth it. So anyway, back to my brother. When he was 16 and he'd just been in and out of trouble over and over and over again, he was a real macho, butch little kid. He loved to fight. Trouble just followed him everywhere he went. And at 16, he wanted to drop out of school. And my folks said, okay, fine, you want to drop out of school, you either get a job or you join the military. And he didn't particularly want to get a job, I guess. I think that was the ultimatum. So anyway, he joined the Navy. At that time, I was 2. I really, sadly, don't have any memory of my brother when he was still living at home. I mean, I was 2 and under, so, you know, that kind of makes sense. So he joined the Navy. After, I don't know how long being in the Navy, he went AWOL, held up a gas station or a liquor store or something with a phony gun, and he got 3 years in prison for that. I think he did the full 3 years, as I remember. As far as I know, my parents completely abandoned him during that time. My brother was really not a treasured child. He really wasn't. Looking back at the way my mom talked about his childhood and the way she talked about him, there was a lot of resentment. And I don't want to say he was a hated child, but I don't think he ever had a really warm relationship with my parents either. They just weren't equipped to handle a little boy who probably had, I don't know what issues he had. He probably had ADD. He was absolutely brilliant. Oh my gosh, his IQ would, I don't want to brag, but it was way up there. And they weren't ready to handle him. So, where am I? The next time I saw my brother, we traveled to New Jersey. I was 7. I remember a motel room. I remember my brother being there and showing us pictures of his girlfriend who had like this bouffant hairdo. We didn't meet her. I remember going to a big, like an outlet store that my brother worked at called Two Guys in New Jersey. And he let me pick out a toy. And I even remember that I got like some kind of clay thing that had like molds. So you could press the clay into this mold and make these funny kind of faces. It's so funny. I remember that toy. I remember being in the motel room late that night, and my parents were talking to my brother, I guess catching up on old times, whatever, and I'm sitting on the bed in the motel room and I yawned. My mother noticed and she said, "Oh, you're getting sleepy." And, you know, I was going to protest the way children do when you tell them they're sleepy. But my brother piped up and he said, "She's not sleepy. She probably just needs oxygen." At that moment, I decided my brother was the coolest person in the world. I kind of already thought he was the coolest person in the world. When he'd been in the Navy, he'd sent me a little sailor doll. It was a little doll about this big that had a sailor uniform on it, and it closed its eyes when you laid it down. And I called it my Bubba doll because he was my Bubba. And I kind of idolized him. I didn't know him that well, but I kind of idolized him. And at the point when he was in the service, my parents didn't have anything negative to say about him. I don't know, he was kind of the golden child as long as he was in the military, but once he went to prison, it was like, oh yeah, you turned out just the way we expected you to turn out. I felt bad for my brother. So after that trip to New Jersey to visit him when I was 7, the next time I saw him, he had married an Italian girl. I was 13. So this is 6 years later. And he had a 3.5-year-old daughter. And her name was Lisa. And she was just this precious little thing. They came out to visit us, and I just fell in love with little Lisa. I had my hero back, my brother. We thought they were going to move out to California. At the last minute, they decided not to. I'm not sure why. But we had that wonderful visit. That marriage wound up not lasting. But little Lisa actually got a hold of me a few years ago. Go figure. Thank you, Internet. And we had a great chat. She's a lovely young woman now. Okay, what was I going to tell you about next? Okay, so he went back to New Jersey, and the next time I saw him, he moved back to California again, single man. And for a while moved in with someone that I knew who needed a roommate, who just happened to be Jeff. Yes, my friend Jeff, my gay friend Jeff, who at this point was an openly gay man. My brother rented a room in the same apartment. It was so funny, talk about an odd couple. I mean, Jeff, who was extremely fastidiously neat and clean and completely effeminate. And then there was my brother, who, total macho man, loves the girls, kind of, well, I guess he was clean enough. But they really were quite an odd couple. And to see their dynamic trying to share this apartment was really funny. But I used to go over there and visit a lot, because these were like two of my favorite people in the world. I loved going over to Jeff and Sherwood's apartment. Now, at this point, he didn't really go by the name Sherwood anymore. Sherwood technically was his middle name. His name was Robert Sherwood. So at this point, he preferred to be called Bob. So we called him Bob. So it was Jeff and Bob's apartment. Well, around this time when they were living together and I was still living at home, a high school friend of mine, high school was over with, out of high school, but still hanging around with the same kids, right? So a friend of mine from high school, whose name was Leslie, like me, lived in a house down the hill that just, when you walked in the door, it just bowled you over. It smelled like cat pee so bad. Oh my God, it smelled like cat pee. And her mom, just really never appeared when you would go over there. You'd hear little shufflings and you knew she was there somewhere, but you really never saw her mother. It was a strange, big, old, weird, dirty house that she lived in. Her father lived in Berkeley. I think it was on Durant Avenue, right in the heart of the Telegraph area where all the protests went on in the 60s. Well, this was 1977, 78, and he still lived there. He was an old hippie. He still had some acid in his refrigerator from 1969, some Purple Haze. And his daughter Leslie, who I occasionally hung out with, I think she'd done way too much acid in high school. I don't think she ever quite came back. She was just kind of strange. Nevertheless, for a little while, I hung out with her. One night, it was Halloween, probably Halloween 1978. She and I decided that Halloween night, we were going to drop some acid and answer the door at her dad's house in Berkeley. We were going to answer the door for the trick-or-treaters and just, that would be fun. Yay. So we get over to her place, her dad's place in Berkeley. I don't remember seeing her dad that night. I had met him before. And he talked a lot about LSD and how it opened your third eye and how proud he was of his daughter. It didn't really get weird, this time when I went over there, things got weird. He wasn't there that I saw. Leslie and I went into her room and we dropped this old purple haze that had been in her dad's freezer since 1969. And 20, 30 minutes pass and it starts coming on. And, you know, the corners of the room are starting to melt and things are getting a little trippy. And it just so happened that on her window shade, in her window, was a shadow. And that shadow just happened to take the shape of the number 7. Completely a coincidence. And she looked at that and she said, look, look, do you see it? Do you see the 7? And I said, oh yeah, that's a trip. And she goes, it's the perfection. Don't you see it? It's the perfection. She proceeds to tell me that my third eye has opened, and it's time that I knew the truth, that her father was the Messiah, and I could be his disciple. I listened to this, and I knew that if I stayed and listened for too long, that I was going to start believing this. Because I recognized my own vulnerability at that moment. I was cognizant of the fact that I was on a hallucinogen and that this girl was starting to say things that my normal mind would just reject, but that my mind high on LSD just might start accepting. Thank God I could see that in myself. And I excused myself and I called my brother at Jeff and his apartment, and I said, can you please come get me? I said, this is getting really weird over here. I'm on acid. I can't go home, but I don't want to be here anymore. And bless his heart, my brother came and got me in his yellow VW hatchback. And we decided to go to San Francisco, to Polk Street, where there is just this enormous gay extravaganza every Halloween, and people are in costume and all these wild, wonderful queens dancing around. And as weird as that might be to some people, to me it just felt like so normal compared to what Leslie was trying to tell me on the LSD. I had a great time with my brother that night. I don't remember Jeff being with us. He might have been, but we just had a hell of a great time that Halloween. Not sure whatever happened to Leslie. She definitely never quite came down as long as I knew her. You know, I hope at some point she finished sowing her wild oats and got her brain cells back. Yeah, who knows what becomes of these people. What became of my brother is quite sad. He went on to be in several family-like situations with sometimes women that had children, sometimes women that didn't. He finally wound up in 1982 marrying a lovely Hawaiian girl and having 3 daughters. However, he and this Hawaiian woman both loved to drink. They dearly loved their alcohol. And eventually that's what killed my brother. And that's a very sad, very horrible story that I don't feel comfortable sharing, but it wasn't pretty. It's not a pretty death. And so, you know, alcohol and drugs aren't the answer to anything. I think they have their place in our lives. I think the Lord put them on this planet so that we could know a little extra joy. But they can do some really permanent damage too. I'm all for the freedom of people to put whatever substance in their body they want to. Lord knows I put some substances in mine. I still do. But I try and keep it safe, and I try and keep it sane. And, that's what God asks of us when he gives us these bodies to walk around in. Keep it safe and keep it sane and have a good time. And I hope you have a good time. And until next time, this is Granny signing off. Love ya. Bye.